Hello dear students, welcome to one more of my video lectures. I have always tried to make these lectures interesting for you, but today's you will especially enjoy because these two stories that I will be dealing with that are prescribed in your syllabus are very interesting in themselves, and who doesn't like to listen to stories. So the two stories that I'm going to talk about today is Cabuliwallah by Rabindranath Tagore and The Golden Frame by R.K. Lakshman. A little bit about both authors. Rabindranath Tagore, as you know, was not only a writer, but he was also a reformer. He was also a freedom fighter, and he was also, multi-talented in the sense that he could sketch, he could write poetry, he could write songs, he could set music, he could also he was very he also had some really fantastic ideas about education, what education should be like, what good education really is. And in this way he was this multi-talented personality who through his writings also conveyed a lot of things that are very close to the human heart, emotionally poignant, are the kind of stories that you'll find in his writings. So let us start with Cabuliwallah. Better. Cabuliwallah, the word comes from Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan. I'm sure you have heard of the place. I'm sure you have heard of Kabul also. What you possibly don't know is that Afghanistan has some of the best dry fruits. You will have to remember first and foremost before we even start the story, because a lot of things will appear strange to you, but you have to remember that this story was written by Rabindranath Tagore more than a century ago, and things back in those days were certainly very different. So one of the things that was different back then was you couldn't get everything at every time. There was a season for everything. Every produce had its own season, and you couldn't get it everywhere. Also, these days it is very easy to find something from South Africa, maybe in the local supermarket. You didn't have that back in those days. So people from Kabul, merchants from Kabul, would come with huge bags, and they would live in India for a few months, and they would sell their wares here, whether it was shawls, whether it was dry fruits, whether it was caps, that kind of thing. Things that were typical to Afghanistan, but things that could not be found here in India. So in one such instance, what happens is that a Cabuliwallah, that is a man from Kabul, a merchant from Kabul named Rahman, comes to Kolkata. And he's selling his dry fruits there, walnuts, sometimes those they're almonds, sometimes dried prunes, that kind of thing. And he just goes around in the lanes of different localities of Kolkata, and he sells his wares. Usually what these people do is that they select one locality, and that is where they sell, so that people also become familiar with them, and they are called again and again to ask for their produce. Now this Cabuliwallah, he is going around in the streets of a certain locality. The author who is telling this story says that his daughter was sitting at his feet, daughter Minnie, maybe 6 years old, and she is a complete chatterbox. She keeps talking, and her father is trying to write, and despite his efforts he is failing because his daughter Minnie cannot stop talking. Now Minnie sees the Cabuliwallah going across the street, and she wants something from him. I don't know if you know this feeling that when there's somebody who's selling something in our street, maybe they ring a bell, or maybe they call out, and we feel like at least going and seeing what it is. So Minnie, definitely being the child she was, she wanted to buy something. She wanted to buy a treat for herself. Initially, she is really terrified of the Cabuliwallah. Minnie's mother, the father says that Minnie's mother is very easily scared, and she is very distrustful of strangers, which is why she does not allow Minnie to go anywhere near him. But the author himself knows that the Cabuliwallah is a good person, not a problem at all. So Minnie and the Kabuliwala, they become great friends. So this is a very unlikely friendship. The Kabuliwala is a middle-aged man. Minnie is just 6 years old. But the Kabuliwala has left a daughter like her at home. He misses his daughter, and in Minnie, he sees his own daughter. So when he sees her, he is reminded of his own daughter, and that is why he likes to sit there and talk to her. Now, Minnie tells him all sorts of weird stories, all sorts of stories, that the kind of stories that kids just make up. And although they are false, the elders pretend to believe them and they listen with a lot of interest. That is the kind of friendship that Minnie and Kabuliwala formed. Every day he would come to her house, and although her father gave him money, the Kabuliwala would quietly give her back the money, but he would also give her a lot of dry fruits, and he would also give her treats. This friendship continued throughout that season. Every day the Kabuliwala would come. He would call out. Minnie would go out. Minnie's mother was just not comfortable with this. But Minnie's father knew that the Kabuliwala was not somebody who was going to create trouble. And he also knew that he genuinely loved his daughter. So he let the two talk. He let the two, yap away all afternoon. And the Kabuliwala had become very, very fond. Kabuliwala, that is Rahman. Rahman had become very, very fond of Minnie. Now, as the season drew to a close, I told you that these people only come and stay here for about for a few months, 2 months, 3 months, whatever the season is, and then they go back. They earn money here, they go back, and that is the money they use to run their household. Again, in the next season, they come down here and they start selling one more time. So this was the end of the season. Towards the end of the season, what Rahman was doing was that he was going around collecting his money from everybody. Very often what happens is that, maybe you don't have cash on you at the moment, or maybe you don't have cash right now. You know that your salary is coming 15 days later, but you want to buy something right away. So sometimes you buy something and you decide that you're going to pay for it later. So this had happened with a lot of people as far as Rahman was concerned, and it was all right. So towards the end of the season, what he would do is he would go around and he would ask for his money back. People would pay him. He would gather all this money and he would go back. With one customer, unfortunately, something really strange happened. The person who had bought a shawl from him refused to pay Rahman his money. Rahman was this tall, hefty Pathan of a man, possibly with a very short temper also. Although he was very sweet and kind and gentle with Minnie, he himself probably had a pretty short fuse. So what happened was, when this man refused to pay him any money, Rahman stabbed him. There was commotion in the street, and when the writer came out to see what was happening, he saw that Rahman was being handcuffed by the police and he was being taken away. Obviously, this means that Rahman is going to spend a long time in the jail. Stabbing somebody is not a joke. Plus, he's not even an Indian. So, people of any country would be particularly upset if somebody from another country just came and stabbed someone here. So, by the same logic, Rahman had to spend a long, long time in jail after that. Now, years passed. Minnie grew up. From this chatterbox of a girl, she became a shy adolescent, and it was time for her to get married. How old was Minnie? Minnie was just 15 years old. Again, as I said, we have to remember that this story is set in a different time. It is set in a time that was more than 125 years ago. And at that time, it was very common for girls to get married at that age. Sometimes they were married off even younger. Sometimes they were so young that they could not even go to their husband's house. They would stay in their parents' house until they grew older. And then once they grew up, they would join their husband's house whenever it was possible. So can you imagine what it must be like that a girl grows up knowing that she is already married? But then that was life back then. So by the time she was 15, it was time for Minnie to get married, and all preparations were underway. Now the next time we see this household is when Minnie has grown up, and she is now ready to get married. It was the day before her wedding day, and by this time Rahman has been released from prison. Before going back home, he wants to come and see Minnie one more time. Because in his mind, that was the one person who was a friend to him, that was the one person who was sweet, with whom there was no politics, with whom there was no fight, with whom there was no quarrel of any sort. And he loved the child, he really loved the child. So he just once again wanted to go and meet her, and once again, possibly talk to her lots and lots and lots before he went back home. Now, when he came to the household, he saw that there were all these festivities going on. And he's really taken aback. He talks to Minnie's father. Minnie's father says that it is Minnie's wedding tomorrow, and he's entirely shocked because in his mind, Minnie is still that 6-year-old kid. And he's probably thinking, yeah, maybe she's grown up, but how much will she be grown up, right? So, he has no idea that she is now old enough to get married. That is how much older she is now. So he's really shocked. Then Minnie's father calls Minnie, and she comes out. She's a shy bride, dressed in all her finery, dressed in all her jewelry, and she's looking very pretty. She's looking like a young woman almost. And Rahman cannot stop his tears. Rahman says, I have to go back home. Minnie's father gives him the money to go back because he has been in prison. He has no money, and he has to go all the way back to Afghanistan. How is he going to go back? Of course he needs money. So Minnie's father gives him the money because what he realizes is that Rahman has not seen his own daughter also for a very long time, and after seeing Minnie, he must have realized that his own girl must also be really grown up now. Not only grown up, but old enough to get married. And he can see that Rahman has missed the entire childhood of his daughter, which is really devastating for Rahman. So, although the money was earmarked for some lights and other decorations, the father gave away the money to Rahman because every father needs to see his daughter. Every father deserves to see his daughter. Nobody deserves to be away from their child like this. So this is a very poignant story. Basically, for one, it sees no boundaries. Rabindranath Tagore always wrote stories like these where boundaries were erased. So Rahman, from the name you can tell, he's a Muslim. Minnie, she comes from a Bengali household. She is a Hindu. Not only that, Rahman is from another country, and he's from Afghanistan. He's come in India, and yet not only does he get a lot of love and affection from Minnie, he also gets a lot of respect from her father, who is the writer of this story. So you can see that these boundaries are blurred. Another big boundary that gets blurred is the age difference. There is a huge age difference between Minnie and Rahman, and yet they become the best of friends. Possibly because children in all their innocence, they don't see these differences. They don't see caste, creed, religion, race, color. They don't see all these things. So Minnie is an innocent soul, one, and also in her Rahman sees his own daughter. So this is a perfect recipe for a great friendship to be formed, and this is how this tale becomes so heartwarming, so touching. The end is quite gut-wrenching. When he sees Minnie, he can see that the entire childhood of his daughter he has missed, and now when he goes back to Kabul, what he'll find is that his daughter is all grown up, possibly ready to be married, possibly already married away, because his family members don't know how long he's going to be away. Maybe the daughter is already married off, and he feels very sad for this. So Minnie's father gives him the money to go back to Afghanistan, and back goes the Cabuliwallah, possibly never to come back again. By the way, there was a movie made on this by the same name, Cabuliwallah. You might want to watch it. It's probably available on YouTube or something. I don't know, but look it up. It will be an interesting experience. So this is story number 1. We go on to the second story now. The second story, which is The Golden Frame. The Golden Frame is a really cute story. Really, really cute. The earlier story, which was Cabuliwallah, is, as I said, it really tugs at your heart. But the golden frame is something that makes you smile. It's something that makes you laugh, and it has a very beautiful twist in the end. So this story has been written by R.K. Lakshman. As I said, I'll be telling you a little bit about both authors. I've already told you about Rabindranath Tagore. Here's a little more about R.K. Lakshman. R.K. Lakshman was not only a writer. He wrote short stories, he wrote novels, but he was also a very well-known cartoonist. R.K. Lakshman's The Common Man is one of the most famous cartoon characters in India. He used to draw cartoons for newspapers, and his political cartoons used to be very, very satirical. So the common man could be seen in all his frames, whatever the setup was. If it was a minister's bungalow, you could see the common man maybe serving tea. If it was a railway station, maybe you could see the common man vending tea. If it was some government office, maybe he's sweeping the floor. That character could be seen everywhere. So the common man was not one person, it was the common man of India. That was the whole concept, and beautiful concept it is. So in writing The Golden Frame, here also R.K. Lakshman is talking about just one such common man, somebody who has a very common profession, somebody who's not very rich, who's not very poor, who's not very intelligent, who's not very dumb, who's neither here nor there, just a common Indian man. This man's name is Datta, and he has a business of making frames for photographs. He has this very tiny little shop in which he sits. You possibly have seen those small workshops where you get your chappal sandals repaired. So you see that they're so tiny that everything is hung on the walls, and there's hardly any space to sit. There's only enough space for one person to sit maybe. So this was the kind of shop that Datta owned, and he would sit in it and he would make frames. Now, one thing to remember about Datta is that he was a weird person. He was really a strange man. He was very taciturn. He did not like to talk to customers. He did not like to socialize. He did not like to waste time with people. He just did not like people, basically. So if you tried to talk to him, you would get monosyllabic answers. What are monosyllabic? Monosyllabic is one syllable. So you'd say yes, no, that kind of thing. No matter how much you talk to him, his answers used to be like that. He just did not like associating with people, just did not like to talk at all. He just wanted to quietly bury his head between his knees and do whatever work he was doing. He was perfectly happy doing that. Now, one day what happens is that he has a customer. The customer has a photo in his hand. It's a largish photo. And he tells Datta that he wants a frame for this photo. So at first Datta doesn't even look at him. 2-3 times he has to call out his name. That is when finally Datta is like, what do you want types? So he says, I want a frame for this photo. So Datta just kind of gestures towards the wall. These are the options, that way. But this man really wants to talk. This customer is really in a mood to talk. He's a talkative fellow. So he tells him that this man, he's our guru. Which man? The man in the photograph. The photograph that he has brought with him, the customer says, he is our guru. He's such a fine gentleman. He's such a spiritual person. He's such an intelligent person. He's such a wise man. And we worship him. We literally worship him like a god. And in our household, he really is considered God. And nothing but the best will do for him. Nothing but the best. Show me your best frame. Datta is really not interested in what kind of man that one is, the person in the photograph is. He doesn't care. He just cares that he has to take that photograph, make a frame for it, and charge whatever money he needs to charge for it. He is really not interested in that man's life. But the customer keeps talking, keeps telling him what a great man, what a wonderful man he is, and how if there were more people like him in the world would be such a better place. Datta is actually tired of listening to him. He's probably zoning out, and he's probably not even listening to him anymore. Now this man asks him, what kind of frames do you have? Show me. Datta shows him different frames. He picks up one that is a golden frame, and he looks at it and he's like, oh yes, this is the frame I want. This is the frame that will suit this man's face, because he's such a great man that only the best frame will do. This is a golden frame and this will look perfect, blah blah, that kind of thing. And he says to Datta, please get this done. By when can you do it? Datta says 1 week. The man says okay. Now Datta is practiced. Datta is very intelligent also. What happens sometimes is that people give him photographs to frame and they never come back. So if Datta makes a frame, all his hard work is gone to waste, and plus he has also lost money. He has used material, he has spent time making that frame, and if the person doesn't come back to get the photograph, it's a waste, right? So Datta smartly, what he does is that every time he gets a photograph, he just keeps it aside. He does not make a frame for it. He waits for the person to come back. And if he comes back and asks, is the frame done yet? He says, no, it will take 2-3 more days. That is when he starts work. Until then, he does not start work on it at all. So this photograph also he takes and just keeps it away. There's this large box in which he has kept such photographs, and by the way, there are a lot of such photographs. So it is surprising how people do this, but a lot of people apparently go to this man to get their frames done and just somehow forget it maybe later, and they don't come and pick up the frame or pick up the photograph. And Datta has a lot of spare photographs like that. So he keeps the photograph away, and now he's working on other things. A week later, this man comes back, the customer, and he says, is it ready yet? And Datta is like, no, it will take 2-3 days more, his usual practice. So he says, yes, please take all the time you want, but please make a very good frame and please do a fantastic job. Because, and he again starts off with how great this man was and how he deserves the best frame and how his photograph is going to be hung in a very prominent place in the house, and goes on rambling. But Datta, listens to him, doesn't react. And then finally, now he knows that the customer is going to come back. He is actually interested in the frame. So he sits down and starts to make the frame. Now imagine this man. He is wearing this soiled kurta. He is wearing a dhoti. He's got a small pencil stub that he sticks behind his ear for markings and everything. There are rulers, there are strips of wood, there are nails, there's a hammer, all kinds of things. And also remember that this is a very small place, very small space in which he's working from. So while he's doing those markings, he needs to find his pencil. He reaches behind his ear and it's not to be found anywhere. It's not behind either of his ears. Datta realizes that it's a small pencil stub. It must have fallen from his hands and it must be down somewhere. So he tries to look for it and it's just not there. Now he gets up and shakes the folds of his dhoti, because he thinks that possibly it got stuck in his dhoti somewhere. It fell from his ears and got stuck in his dhoti. So he starts looking for it by shaking his dhoti vigorously. Unfortunately, what happens is that as he is shaking his dhoti, he knocks over a can of paint. And the paint spills directly onto the photograph. Now here's a big problem Datta has. What is he going to do now? Because the paint has spilled on the photograph. See, again in a state of panic, of course he quickly sets right the can of paint, but already a lot of paint has spilled on the photograph. He quickly tries to rub it with a cloth so that he can take out the paint. That just unfortunately makes it worse. The paint is everywhere and the upper film of the photograph is coming off, which means the face is destroyed, completely destroyed. Now what is Datta to do? He's terrified. He just doesn't know what to do. He's thinking, and he thinks the customer is going to be so angry with him, because this man was very important to the customer. The customer had already said that this man is respected like a god in our house, so his photograph must be treated well. And now the photograph is completely ruined. Datta is terrified. Now once the panic subsides, he starts thinking, thinks, what is he to do? What is he to do? And suddenly he has a brainwave. He starts looking for photographs in that box where there were spare photos. And he starts looking for a photo that is similar to the one that he had. And while he's rifling through it, he actually does find a photo which is quite like the one that the customer had given him. So he says, I'm going to take this chance. He picks up that photograph and frames that one. And then he's waiting with bated breath that when the customer comes and the customer notices something different and he is going to start shouting at me, this is not the photograph I gave you. Datta is really, he has worked himself up. He says, I'm going to argue with him saying, this is the photograph you had given me. I don't have anything else. This is what you had given me. He has decided to argue until he's blue in the face. He's not going to give up. So, the day comes for the customer to come and pick up his frame. Accordingly, the customer comes, and by this time Datta's heart is beating so hard inside his chest. He's just terrified of the fight that is coming ahead, but he's also kind of steeling himself for the fight. Now, when Datta hands over the frame to the man, which is wrapped in a newspaper, the man opens the newspaper very lovingly, takes one look at the photograph, and then looks angrily at Datta and says, what have you done? Okay. And Datta is about to explain that this is the photograph you had brought me. What have I done? I have not done anything, something like that. But the moment he says, what have you done? Datta is about to open his mouth and the customer says, I had ordered an oval frame. This is a square frame. What has happened is that the customer has not realized at all that this is a different frame entirely. And all's well that ends well. Datta is not made to pay for it. Datta is not given any trouble with it, and this is how the story ends. Datta is greatly relieved. The man goes away, takes that frame, maybe pays him, maybe not, but at least he is not accused of falsifying that photograph. Hope you enjoyed this. Goodbye.